For Welcome everyone. As you can see, we will be recording. We'll have the presentation pinned and all that. So if you're not so comfortable or you need to change your name or anything that presents, um, feel free to do so. For the question in the chat, the recording will be sent to all attendees, and it'll also be posted on our YouTube if you look up ILPS-US on YouTube, as well as our website, ILPS.US. So feel free to circulate it afterwards as well. Um, okay. Um, so, welcome on everyone to our webinar, US Out of Our Homelands, Unite to Fight Fascism, War and Militarism. Thank you so much for tuning in from so many different time zones. Good evening or good afternoon, depending where you're at. And it's very exciting to see all the different range of places that people are hopping on from. Um, this webinar is part of a week of action that is still ongoing as we speak, but began at the beginning of this past week in light of the current global political situation, as well as the convening of the United Nations General Assembly. This week of action was called for in coordination with a number of different organizations, including the International League of People's Struggle, some of the organizations that will be speaking today, as well as the Defend Migrants Alliance, and many other organizations too. The list goes on, and um, we're really coming to y'all together in this webinar to be able to have a rich discussion, a sharing of lessons and experiences, a recap of what we've been able to accomplish so far. And really a highlight of the efforts that were undertaken during this week of action. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nima. I am the General Secretary of the International League of People's Struggle. We are a global alliance of anti-imperialist and democratic organizations fighting to address the issues facing the people and fighting to address the root cause of those issues, which is imperialism. Um, and we are joined today by a host of speakers who will introduce themselves in more depth later on, but representing different organizations and movements. We have Nodutdol, who is part of the efforts to organize Koreans in the diaspora and linking up with Koreans in the peninsula, fighting for the liberation of and unification of the whole of Korea. We have BAYAN USA, or Bagang Alyansang Makabayan. BAYAN USA is an overseas chapter of BAYAN, which is an alliance of national democratic organizations, also fighting for genuine democracy and national liberation in the Philippines. And we have our friends from JUPI, who are organizing Puerto Rican youth and students for genuine democracy and liberation of the Puerto Rican archipelago. So a very exciting roster of speakers today. Just to give a little bit of context of what set the basis for this week of action, as well as the intentions behind this webinar itself, I'm just going to share a little bit of a recap of the current developments in the news that folks might have been seeing. If we could go to the next slide. Currently right now, as folks might be aware, there really has been a rising groundswell and upsurge of people around the world and in this country taking action, mobilizing in the streets and organizing in response to many of the developments that are happening in the world today. One of the big things that we're seeing right now is that there has been a heightening of anti-people economic policies, the burden of which is shouldered by everyday working people, and which are causing an increase and sharpening economic conditions and economic crisis. As folks have seen, really in a number of countries, we've seen a rise in unequal tariff agreements, forcing our homelands to be more dependent on the global economic system dominated by the US. Um, we're seeing the rise of anti-people neoliberal policies, resulting in the stagnation of wages for workers, um, uh, resulting in the rising cost of living, attacks on education, so on and so forth. And we're seeing the pushing forward of various types of neoliberal development projects that are continually displacing the people from their own homes and attacking their basic livelihood. And the main perpetrator of these various economic policies and the negative impacts they're having is the United States, which is aiming to continue to preserve its economic dominance in the world, despite and aiming to fight off the decline of its economic power through these various policies and trying to bring these various countries and nations under the fold of its economic chokehold. And so you'll see some of these different news articles where you can see how the U.S. is aggressively pushing forward these policies, which allow it to more easily exploit the people of the world and in this country, allow it to more easily plunder the land and the resources, and allow it to funnel more wealth into the tiny minority of the ruling class at the top of the U.S. economic hierarchy. Um, and it does this through these various aggressive measures, as well as efforts to collaborate with different local ruling class representatives, such as in the Philippines or in Puerto Rico or in Indonesia. But of course, we're seeing also a rising consciousness among the people and militancy to organize against this. As the people have been mobilizing to expose and oppose U.S. Foreign intervention and domination of their homelands. Next slide, please. Oh, spoiler, we skipped to the end. Gonna backtrack a little bit. But you all are getting a sneak peek now. Um, anyway, of course, accompanying these aggressive economic measures, the US is also resorting to more and more aggressive military activities. Um, so we're also seeing a trend of rising militarization and fascism around the world, promoted and predominantly backed by the US. So of course, folks are very aware that in this country, there has been a rising aggressive onslaught against migrant communities, especially all across the country, with the expansion of ICE, militarization of various cities, and overall attacks against the people in an effort to keep working people in a position of fear and division and make them more easily exploitable. But beyond the U.S., there has been the similar and commensurate overall militarization and increased aggression by the U.S. in provoking regional wars and escalating towards the potential risk of global war. So this doesn't need reiterating, but we've seen the crisis as a result of the U.S. Zionist genocidal attack against the Palestinian people continually escalating and developing. We're seeing that, for example, in countries like the Philippines, as peasants and farm workers are already facing the negative impacts of flooding and the lack of support
Thank
from.
you so much. I tried to make it back, but probably.
Sorry, I think, okay, good, we got it. As well as lack of support from the government, we're also seeing the government of the Philippines collaborating with the US, buying war weapons, which is using to attack civilian areas, causing further displacement. Earlier this past year, there was the conclusion of the Ulchi Freedom Shield military exercises between the ROK and the US. And we've even seen in Puerto Rico the bolstering of military presence using the archipelago as a holding area for these various types of aircrafts. And these are unfortunately just a snapshot of how the U.S. is building up its capacity to provoke war in all of these major regions across the world. Similarly, as part of its effort to attack those that it deems a threat to its current domination. And so all of this was the context in which we entered this week, where the UN was convening its General Assembly. Um, Next slide. Um, and this General Assembly was under the supposed theme of better together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. But unfortunately, this theme rings quite hollow as we know that the UN has long been dominated by the US and utilized as a mechanism by which it exerts its economic, political, and diplomatic pressure to bend and shape the world to its own interests. And it collaborates with various subservient governments around the world to further advance those objectives. And so we see that despite this theme of peace, development, and human rights, we know from the current conditions that the UN was not in a position to speak on these issues in a genuine manner. For example, when talking of peace in the context of Palestine, the Palestinian delegation was prevented from even easily being able to participate in the United Nations General Assembly, facing all kinds of barriers through revoking of their visas, and so on and so forth, while Netanyahu was allowed to speak freely, in which he said that he would, quote, finish the job in Gaza. So that's the kind of peace that they're talking about. They're talking about the type of peace that results in the attempted quelling and genocide and attacks against people fighting for their own liberation. Um, there was all kinds of discussion of development, but really, most of the development that was talked about was the kind of development that benefits U.S.-based corporations against the interests of working people. And I hope I don't even need to address the question of human rights when these very states that are coming together to talk about human rights have been the main perpetrators, violating human rights around the world, violating the people's right to sovereignty, well-being, and livelihood. Um, and so, while it would be very ideal to have a global convening that genuinely talks about these kinds of things, um, uh, uh, ILPS and the various alliances that we worked with and our member organizations saw to it as important that we are present and showing that the people are in action and we are ready to assert the genuine interests of the people, assert the genuine needs of those of our people back in our homelands, and to expose the lies being promoted. Just during the UN General Assembly, for example, Donald Trump spoke of bringing in the golden age of America, which was something that he opened his inauguration with. And he bragged about supposedly lowering energy costs and grocery prices and mortgage rates. But I think anyone who has lived in the US at all knows that this is a lie. And so ILPS was out there in the streets with the people to expose these lies and to promote a genuine solution. Next slide, and this will be the closeout. Um, and so just to give a snapshot, it was a very busy week of action. Pretty much every single day this past week and continuing for the next few days, there were all manner of activities. You can see here snapshots of mass mobilizations, of cultural nights that were convened, of educational events that were hosted. Some that are shown here, there was a major mobilization of different trade unions and migrants organizations opposing the fascist attacks by ICE against the people. We see that those from the Filipino community were mobilizing to raise the issues of overseas Filipinos who are constantly being pushed from their homeland, facing fascist attacks and continually neglected by their government, taking action. We see folks from the Puerto Rican community, from the Palestinian movement, all coming together, mobilizing in action. And the underlying essence of all of these various forms of action, of all of the things that our movements are fighting for, is the call for the US to be out of our homelands, the call for genuine liberation and democracy, the call to end fascism, to end war, and to end militarism. And so that was the theme that we entered this week of action with and are continuing to raise up. And we know that these calls will not be met by the ruling class, but will be taken up by the people in action together, the people militantly struggling and organizing together. And while we were mobilizing in the US at the UN General Assembly, we are part and parcel and linked up with the various mass movements that are growing in our homelands themselves. such as in the Philippines, with hundreds of thousands who have been mobilizing in opposition to the ongoing corruption and militarization. The people of Indonesia mobilizing, similarly exposing such corruption and violent repression and attacks. And of course, the people of Palestine steadfastly taking continual action against the Zionist genocide. And I think even our folks in Puerto Rico just came off a day of action yesterday. And so really, we assert that it is the people themselves who will liberate their homelands. Um, and so this webinar is one part of that week of action where we wanted to come together, and we'll hear from our speakers, deepening our understanding of the analysis of the current state of the liberation movements around the world, the current state and understanding of the political situation that we're facing, as well as giving us a roadmap for how we'll move ahead. How will we take action around these different issues and genuinely organize the people for a just solution to this crisis. And so with that, thank you all for joining. I will stop here, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, Cheho from Nodutdol, who will be the opener for our discussion today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nima. Thank you. Let's see. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. And then we also have the slides ready. Okay. Let's see. There should be slides way before this one. It should just be like a logo. This is US out of Korea. Yes. Okay. Hello, thank you. My name is Cheho. My pronouns are she and he. I'm a member of Nodutdol and I'm calling in from Long Beach, California. Very grateful to be here and to share about our US out of Korea campaign. We could go to the next slide. So I'm gonna start us off with a little bit of grounding. And so the political context that we're working with right now is that the US is currently losing credibility in Korea. And so as part of the Trump administration's recent tariff demands, the ROK has accepted a 15% tariff on goods exported to the US. They've pledged a $100 billion purchase of US liquid natural gas. And the US is also demanding a $350 billion upfront cash investment into US industry, which essentially would bleed South Korea's foreign reserves dry and also trigger a currency crisis. And so Korea is currently requesting a currency swap because of this, basically a deal to allow them to borrow dollars at a fixed exchange rate, but the US is refusing this request. Initially, Korean conglomerates, also called chaebols in Korea, seemed ready to move their production to the US to avoid or reduce tariffs completely. However, the way that the US is going about negotiations right now, along with the recent Hyundai ICE raid, are raising some pretty serious questions in South Korea. And so in this way, the US is continuing to dig its own grave, and doubts about the US are growing, and anger will only continue to grow now that the 316 Korean workers who were detained by ICE, they've returned home and are beginning to tell their stories. And so the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs has since promised to investigate human rights abuses committed by ICE. And for many in the South Korean public, the allyship and alleged safety of the United States has come into question. And even for Korean bourgeoisie who are now wondering if their investments in the US are safe. Here we see protesters at the US Embassy in Seoul holding signs reading, "Stop investing in the US," and "Is Korea a pushover? We don't need this alliance." We can go to the next slide, please. And so while these doubts are growing, the alliance is not over yet. neither is the ROK complicity in US continuous warmongering. So last Friday, the US and ROK wrapped up two sets of war exercises, which were executed simultaneously for all of last week from September 15th to September 19th. So the first is Iron Mace, which is a joint tabletop exercise between the US and ROK in preparation for waging nuclear war. The second is called Freedom Edge, which is a trilateral war exercise, but between the US, ROK, and also Japan, with the goal of strengthening the alliance and protecting their imperial interests in the region. And recent exercises, quote, incorporated air and maritime training with cyber warfare and special operations abilities, as well as ballistic missile defense drills. But we know that these drills are not defensive. It is quite the opposite. Just earlier this year, I want to say in March of this year, the ROK Air Force dropped 8 500-pound bombs on a South Korean village called Nohongni during these war exercises. They injured 31 people and damaged over 150 buildings, the majority of which were people's homes. And this is why we need the US to leave Korea and why we're waging this campaign, which we'll talk about on the next slides. This is just a slide that says campaign demands, because we're going to show our campaign demands next. Next slide, please. Our first demand, first and foremost, is to demand the US out of Korea. We demand the full and permanent withdrawal of US troops and weapon systems from Korea. We demand that all Korean land, water, and airspace appropriated for the US military be returned to the Korean people. And our second is on the next slide, which is to end the US-South Korea alliance. We demand an end to all US-South Korea alliances, including the JACUS Trilateral Security Cooperation. We demand an end to all US-South Korea joint command structures, the Combined Forces Command, as well as the UN Command. Next, please. Our third demand is to end all aggression against the DPRK. We demand an end to all US military exercises in Korea, and we demand that all sanctions against North Korea be lifted. And our final demand is on the next slide, which is to end the war economy. We demand the US government divert spending from war, prisons, and policing, and instead we demand housing, education, healthcare, and climate justice for working people. So next, we'll talk about recent days of actions that we've had on the next slide, kind of throughout this year. We've carried this spirit of this campaign that we launched last year into the streets, and some of our most recent days of action in LA, at least, include First Movement against Imperial Japanese occupation. We also had our Gwangju Uprising Street Festival on the 45th anniversary of the 1980 Gwangju Democratization Movement. Most recently, we came together for Gwangbokjeol, or National Liberation Day, and using the spirit and momentum also from our recent People's Summit for Korea, which happened in mid to late July. We drummed, we chanted, collected donations for local K-Town vendors to stay safer from ICE, and absolutely demolished this homemade Donald Trump piñata. Pictures are on the Instagram. It was really cool. But these days of action are not just like the fun activities and the culturals. The core purpose is to bring attention to Korean revolutionary history and to affirm the significance of these dates. We hope to cement our own revolutionary history in collective memory through the lens of anti-imperialism. So, People's Summit for Korea, did anyone here attend? I know I was there. We had a lot of goals for the summit, deepening solidarity, unity with progressive organizers in the ROK, among others. So this past July, we had the truly like deep, great honor of hosting the People Summit for Korea with our convener organizations. 500 people attended with representation across 36 US states and 153 organizations, including a delegation from major progressive organizations from South Korea. Regional delegations were organized in the Bay, SoCal, the DMV area, and the PNW, convened in New York City. And so through this summit, we were able to deepen solidarity and unity with progressive organizers in the ROK. We consolidated Korean progressive forces in the US and ROK, propagated a greater sense of internationalism among all of us. We wanted to build deeper relations with other anti-imperialist and national liberation movements here, as well as position Korea's national liberation struggle within the global anti-imperialist movement. And it was successful in bringing our campaign demands to a much wider audience, many of whom were unfamiliar with the nature of the ROK-US alliance, in that it is very exploitative. And on another exciting note, during the National Liberation Day 815 rally, but in Seoul this year, the vice chairperson of the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions actually wore our US out of Korea shirt while making a speech that touched on points including like the need for the removal of US troops out of Korea, the need for anti-imperialism to be at the forefront of the Korean liberation struggle. And so this language has reemerged in South Korea that's been sidelined and repressed for decades after being a fringe movement, around anti-US sentiment, and talking about national liberation. And so this anti-American movement in Korea is clearly entering a new era, and the shift is also influenced by our movement here in the US, which speaks to our role as diaspora. And so we'll be eyeing these developments very closely. It's very exciting. Can go to our next slide also. With relations. So what lies ahead for the ROK, DPRK, and US relations? So as Nima mentioned, the UNGA, United States General Assembly, is ongoing in New York City. And just a few days ago, the recently elected Korean President Lee Jae-myung delivered a speech that marked a few new shifts in the ROK's foreign policy with the DPRK, with North Korea. And so though we've seen similar approaches fail from other liberal administrations, it's still pretty important to consider. So in his address, Lee Jae-myung, he basically reaffirmed that the ROK will respect the DPRK's current economic political system and will not pursue any form of reunification by absorption. And he stated that the ROK would provide active support and cooperation for efforts to normalize relations with the international community, including between the US and the DPRK. And so he also introduced the END, or END initiative, which would place denuclearization as a more long-term goal, with the intention of using exchange and normalization as the short-term topics to focus on if the DPRK is even willing to come to the negotiation table. And so these are definite improvements from the past administration of Yoon Suk-yeol, but more importantly, these are needed improvements. And is very similar to an approach that was taken in 1994, which was called the Agreed Framework, which was basically just an agreement between the US and DPRK to dismantle nuclear weapons programs in the DPRK in exchange for energy and relation normalization, which failed because the US does not uphold its obligations to provide the DPRK with civilian nuclear technology. And the DPRK is unlikely to agree with any process that seeks to pause its nuclear weapons development or otherwise infringe on its own sovereignty, which makes sense. We don't expect to see movement on this yet, but it's becoming pretty clear that the US-ROK alliance is beginning to crumble. And then as for APEC, if anyone was there at Noda Apex San Francisco in November of 2023, that was pretty cool. Also very cold. But another major event is on the horizon, which is APEC 2025, which will take place on October 31st of this year in Korea, in Gyeongju, which is a city of great cultural and historical significance. So again, APEC stands for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. It's an alliance of 21 economies in the Asia-Pacific region that comes together promoting open regionalism, enhancing globalization through free trade agreements. We'll be hosting a webinar about this year's APEC in Korea on October 8th of next month. So stay tuned for details. They'll be on our Instagram or sent out with emails to our community members. But yeah, a brief overview of that is just primary economic issues that Korea is facing right now is addressing the aging workforce, impending climate crisis, things like that. And lastly, with Lee Jae-myung being elected, contradictions are sharpening because he's a little more left-leaning. And so Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea is taking a more combative tone, given the growing popular anger towards the US because of all of these things. Rifts are forming in the ROK and US alliance because of the interests of the masses and even the bourgeoisie of South Korea. They are increasingly at odds with the interests of US imperialism, and people are seeing that. In a recent Facebook post, Lee Jae-myung criticized the, quote, submissive mindset of people who believe that Korea needs foreign troops, which kind of hints at an independent South Korean military. Lee Jae-myung has also taken a notable stance in support of coexistence with the DPRK, to denuclearization, to peaceful reunification. And so while this is an improvement over Yoon Suk-yeol, the issue is that the conditions have changed and the DPRK is no longer willing to discuss denuclearization or peaceful reunification since 2023. And so President Yi's steps toward a more independent Korea should be embraced and pushed further, but we know that Lee Jae-myung is also not the ultimate liberator of Korea. The masses of Korea will be the ones to take up that task. And so lastly, just beyond saying that the ROK wants peace with the DPRK, there needs to be concrete action. The US war games need to be rejected. The ROK needs to exit its alliances with the US and take back control of its own military. The Constitution needs to be amended so that the ROK no longer has territorial claims over the DPRK. And the anti-communist national security law must be abolished. These are minimum steps that have to be taken to concretely reduce hostility and tension on the peninsula. They're not going to be easy to achieve politically at all, but it's what has to be done. And so looking forward, APEX being held in Korea, we're hosting a webinar, more details to come. And we're also having a People Summit for Korea report back in LA on October 11th at All Power Books. We'll be talking about the summit, what we learned, what happened, also time to be determined. Yeah, thank you so much. I'll pass it on to whoever's next.
Thank you so much, Teho and Nodutdol, for your presentation and for all the work that you all have been doing, and for really making clear the emphasis, especially on the role of the people in continuing to fight for genuine liberation, sovereignty, and just peace as well. Please keep an eye out for these upcoming activities and events. We'll definitely make sure to circulate those as well. But to continue the conversation then going forward, next I would like to introduce Nieves. Nieves is the Secretary General of BAYAN USA, and they'll be discussing the current conditions in the Philippines and the ongoing US out of Korea campaign, or US out of the Philippines campaign, rather. So welcome on, Nieves.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Cool. So I'm going to about the US Out of the Philippines campaign in this really wonderful panel of comrades who hail from different national liberation movements. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to share who we are, BAYAN USA is an alliance of over 40 Filipino 40 Filipino organizations here in the United States, representing many different sectors: workers, youth and students, migrants, educators, women, artists, and more. We are the first and largest overseas chapter of BAYAN, which is the campaign center for the National Democratic Movement of the Philippines, which is fighting for national liberation of our home country, which really looks like organizing Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but everywhere that we may be, as one of the largest diasporas in the world. Just to put it up front, it is our 20-year anniversary in this year. So we are very grassroots. So yeah, if you would like to support our work, please make a donation. Here's the QR code. And yeah, here's the Venmo and PayPal as well. So next slide. Last year we relaunched our US Out of the Philippines campaign, actually inspired by our comrades in Nodutdol. The context being the intensification of militarism in the so-called Indo-Pacific, just the increased US military presence in the Philippines, and really the need to expose and oppose US intervention in our country, especially because there's so much Black propaganda out there that has really convinced a lot of Filipinos that the US is a hero, and that China is a boogeyman, that would justify like unconditional US presence in our home country. So we actually filmed a documentary based on a peace mission that we organized last year. Nodutdol comrades have actually been going on the peace mission since 2014. So really happy to be in the same panel with you guys. So I'm just gonna show part of the film to give people a sense of our history and the context of US military presence in our country. So if I could just have share screen again. Yes, we love you too. It's funny because we just like we had dinner with some Nodutdol folks yesterday. So it's really nice to follow it up with this joint webinar. Okay, let me share some. Okay, do you see my screen? Okay, okay. I think people do. All right, I'll play.
127 years ago, the Filipino people were on the verge of winning their revolution for national liberation after more than 300 years of Spanish colonial rule. 1 year later, in 1899, another foreign aggressor snatched victory from their grasp. The Philippine-American War was the United States' first conquest overseas as a fledgling imperialist power. While it is almost impossible to know the exact figure of Filipinos killed during the more than decade-long war, low estimates put the number at 200,000. More realistic estimates put it at over 1 million, out of a population of only 7 million at the time. Today, over 100 years later, the real history of the Philippine-American War has all but vanished from textbooks. But the presence and control of the United States in the Philippines, far from vanishing, remains deeply rooted in the country's economy, politics, and culture. In the spring of 2024, 28 delegates from the United States traveled to the Philippines. We integrated with farmers, fishers, workers, indigenous peoples, women, people of faith, and youth, all to learn the lasting legacy and current-day impacts of U.S. military presence on Philippine soil. These are their stories of war, land, repression, and of the people's resistance. After more than 4 decades of being an American colony, the Philippines was granted nominal independence in 1946.
To proclaim the independence of the Philippines as a separate and self-governing nation.
But that didn't mean the U.S. left the archipelago. Through the Bases Treaty, the U.S. established Clark Air Base and Subic Naval Base, which at the time were the U.S.'s largest overseas military bases. In the decades to follow, the U.S. military was responsible for environmental destruction, violence against women and children, and even for dragging Filipinos to fight in wars they did not want to be in, like the Vietnam War. By 1991, a protest movement of Filipinos across the country forced the Senate not to renew the basing agreement. It was an unprecedented victory that even caught the U.S. off guard.
There are so many issues against the bases, but the main issue was the issue of sovereignty, right? The best propagandists are the youth, especially the students, because they're always more open, to new ideas among students to popularize the anti-bases campaign. Most schools would organize a forum on the U.S. bases or debates. We knew these politicians will never act against the bases if there's not a strong public sentiment against them. Until we were convinced that politicians can already feel the pulse of the masses against the American bases. Finally, we were able to convince Congress.
Keen on maintaining the Philippines as a strategic geopolitical foothold in the Asia-Pacific region, the U.S. would go on to collude with subsequent Philippine administrations to enact various military agreements that would effectively circumvent the ban on U.S. bases.
They thought that maybe there's a way that American forces can still visit the Philippines, right? So first they have this VFA, Visiting Forces Agreement.
U.S. troops! Out now! U.S. troops! Out now! Imperialismo!
The 1999 Visiting Forces Agreement, which allowed for U.S. troops to return, and the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement.
Critics of the new military deal between the Philippines and the United States have a basis to be concerned. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, allows the U.S. to build military facilities and pre-position defense assets in agreed locations that are yet to be determined by the two countries. While EDCA limits the agreed locations to existing Philippine military bases, Marcos says it's possible for the Philippine Armed Forces to establish new bases if the U.S. asks for them. The locations are limited to areas the military determines to be strategic for the two countries' mutual interests. Strategic refers to factors like maritime security, maritime domain awareness, and humanitarian assistance and disaster response.
Okay, so that was a quick context of a very long and complicated history. I can actually, yeah, can someone keep screen sharing the other presentation? Thank you. Yeah, so the documentary goes more into like personal stories of people, community members we've met in the Philippines that really detail the impacts on the Filipino people, especially on national sovereignty, women's rights, and environmental discussion, livelihood, etc. We are hoping to continue the documentary with the upcoming peace mission this coming November. But yeah, I mean, I already detailed a lot of those things. But I'm gonna go into now like the the current day and also what the fight looks like. So today we have Marcos Jr., the son of this dictator, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., pictured on the screen, who declared martial law in the Philippines. And that time was marked by human rights violations, removal of checks and balances, corruption, and also the consolidation of what we call the bureaucrat capitalist class, which really is made up of landlords and comprador bourgeoisie, people whose entire, quote unquote livelihood is based on leeching off of the Philippine people's resources and labor. And so this bureaucrat capitalist class is really like every single presidential administration, people who run the government and really enrich themselves through the government and selling out our country to imperialists, especially like the US. So I think that framework is really important to frame this US out of the Philippines campaign, which, tactically really target the US military bases, but also really extends to the neoliberal agreements, the different ways that this bureaucrat capitalist class have sold out our country, especially to the United States. So next slide, please. So in the last month, in August, there's really been a surge of outrage against the Philippine government for basically a corruption scandal of something that's been going on for a long time, which was multi-billion peso flood control projects, which are supposed to protect the people from environmental disasters like typhoons, hurricanes, etc. And finding out that there were many reports of ghost projects where these flood control projects were actually being pocketed by politicians instead of going into mitigating these disasters. Yeah, so you can see here, this cutout of Marcos Jr. and giving his State of the Nation address, the equivalent of a State of the Union address, while people are literally voting down the street. So it's really the level of corruption that is inherent in our country. Next slide, please. So now what we're seeing on the anniversary of martial law, September 21st, really this big uprising, over 100,000 people marched against corruption in the Philippines, really inspired by our siblings in Indonesia, which is right next door, and also Nepal. And so a lot of young people, church people, like just people who aren't even really, politically active before this moment, really had enough. And also just this week, Typhoon Ragasa hit the Philippines as well, which is one of the strongest typhoons on Earth, like even stronger than Typhoon Haiyan. So people are really, really angered by this. Next slide. And so Bongbong Marcos Jr., the president, has now been making a show of, being sympathetic to the people, when really he actually has the highest amount of, what do you call it, discretionary funds that he can use, and he probably pockets. So they're called confidential intelligence funds. He has almost half of the 2026 budget is going to him, and he can basically use all those billions of pesos for whatever he wants. But now he's saying, oh, I'd be an activist too if I weren't president. And we also see this picture of him looking like the Monopoly man on the right-hand side. So yeah, just a lot of hypocrisy, lies that we're seeing from the president and the government Republic of the Philippines. Next slide. But yeah, how does this relate to our US out of the Philippines campaign? So, when we are a country, basically a neo-colony of the United States, run by these puppets that have been installed basically like a century ago, that continue this legacy of treating the government as a means of enriching themselves. That also really means opening our country up to war. Yeah, as you can see here, here's Marcos and his imperialist overlord Trump shaking hands. And really the situation in the West Philippine Sea, where the Chinese military has indeed been aggressive towards Filipino ships in contested waters, which are internationally recognized as Filipino territory or exclusive economic zones, but using this situation to justify US presence in our home country. So the US, who wants to really contain China as its main rival, has expanded its military presence to at least 9 known de facto US bases in the Philippines, which was reviewed in the video. But there's actually more than that are just not declared. And if you look at them on a map, they are all facing Taiwan or the contested West Philippine Sea. And ever increasing troop presence and joint military exercises are to be had between the US and the Philippines, and also the other junior imperialist powers of the US. And so this headline here, it says we'll have everything. US Philippines confirms munitions hub for Subic Bay. So yeah, just recently there's a confirmation of this ammunition manufacturing hub that will amass ammunition and missiles in Subic Bay, which the Philippine movement had kicked out the US military in the 90s, and now they're back. And Marcos Jr.'s last visit to DC, Trump said alongside him in a press conference that he's excited to have all the speedy missiles, the slow ones, the accurate ones, the ones that are slightly less accurate, just making jest of a very dangerous situation for the Filipino people. Because really this increased military presence of the US makes it so that the Philippines would be the front line of a future war between the two superpowers, really placing Filipino lives in grave danger. And I think, a metaphor that might help in our context is like, imagine what the US would say or react to if China placed 9 bases in Cuba facing the United States, for example. And the Philippines, despite selling out our country for basically free trade agreement on the tariffs, basically allowing 9 US bases and the munition hub, they still didn't get a break from the steep tariffs that Trump's been enacting on everyone, even his allies. So if you go to the next slide. So yeah, I think essentially Marcos Jr. and all Philippine presidents have been lapdogs to the US. Despite selling us out, like I said, Marcos has opened up the market even more to the US with 0 tariffs. But then the Philippines only got a 1% reduction from their 20% tariff down to 19. So it's really pathetic. And Marcos is really a weak president that is really facing a lot of increasing discontent. And so that's part of why his administration is really vying for a seat on the UN Security Council, leading up to the 2028 presidential elections in the Philippines to really, clean up their image to the international community, and also challenge China in the arena of the UN Security Council, because China is a permanent voting member. So that really leads to the week of action that this webinar is discussing, as to why the Philippine administration is here. Funnily enough, Marcos didn't come because he had to deal with the uprisings in the Philippines. But as we speak right now, you know, the Department of Foreign Affairs Secretary is delivering her address, trying to make the Philippines out to be this big, you know, defender of international human rights, when really clearly it is not, as you can see from the uprisings and the discontent of the Filipino people. Next slide. So tying it to the migrants here, Filipino migrants, you know, the corruption and the state neglect and abandonment extends to us as well overseas, because of the way that the Philippine economy has been structured, where there are no national industries that can maintain a sustainable livelihood for Filipino people. The government has basically institutionalized forced migration. So there's a lot of Filipinos who leave the country to work as manual laborers. So there's up to 10,000 plus migrants, Filipino migrants that leave the Philippines every day. And then, you know, when they come to a place like the US, they are now facing fascist attacks here too. And it's really heightened in the last year, where even green card holders, permanent residents are being detained. Next slide. Yeah, and so again, you can see the continued rottenness of the Philippine government and its allegiance to the US, where the ambassador of the Philippines is telling Filipinos that they should just deport before they're deported, to telling them to self-deport, quote unquote. Even this big corruption scandal and like the subsequent mass movement around it, what the administration is saying, that, oh, addressing corruption is important because it can affect investor confidence. And that's specifically US investors that they're trying to attract to invest in their country. And, you know, that investments aren't necessarily bad, but with the way the country is structured, that capital will not stay and actually help with the development of the country for the people in the Philippines. Yeah, and then also the Department of Migrant Workers labor attaché. So this person, Macy Maglanque, is supposed to attend to, you know, migrant workers in distress. She was actually connected to the flood control corruption that has, you know, erupted, and she was just recalled. So you can see these people are supposed to be helping Filipino migrants overseas, but are very, very corrupt and very, very loyal to the United States. Next slide. So yeah, what we're seeing now really is the US is now in this position where it's pressuring its puppet, Marcos Jr., right, who is really, really needs US support and backing if he is to win in the 2028 Philippine presidential elections against his rival, Sara Duterte. He's really being pressured by the United States to focus on external defense, quote unquote. Really, it's like military aggression against China, which means, you know, having to resolve what the, you know, the GRP's little problem, which is the People's Democratic Revolution of the Philippines, which is waging an ongoing armed struggle in the countryside of the Philippines. And so now they have declared that they're going to squash all the revolutionary forces by 2028. They've been saying that for decades. The deadline just keeps getting pushed back more and more because they really want to focus their forces like away from the internal insurgency problem that they have towards external, quote unquote, defense with China. So what we're seeing, you know, is in terms of our movements fights, like the People's Democratic Revolution of the Philippines is really the best defense of our national sovereignty because it really splits the attention of the armed forces of the Philippines. And yeah, really is for, you know, fighting for the genuine liberation of the Filipino people. Next slide. Yes, they keep pushing back the deadline because they keep failing to actually crush the movement. So other, you know, I guess zooming in more, right? That's kind of the big picture. There is ongoing protest as I speak right now. There is a protest in New York against the GRP, Government Republic of the Philippines, because we have been trying to meet with them for the last week that they have been here about, you know, the plight of all the Filipino migrants that they have failed to really meet with and take care of. So yeah, the struggle continues here overseas as well as back home in the Philippines. You can see here the amount of times that we have really pushed them to respond, but they failed to meet with us. So now we're mounting an indignation rally in front of the Philippine consulate, which is a few blocks away from the United Nations, to register our demand and really show that even overseas, we are part of the hundreds of thousands of people that are rising up against the rotten government, the rotten fascist system in the Philippines. Next slide. And so ways that you can all support is really endorse our campaign, US Out of the Philippines. Here are the specific goals and demands. The presentation I gave really, you know, tried to interrelate this specific campaign to the larger situation. But we do have specific goals and demands for this campaign specifically. So expose and oppose the US's intensifying militarization of the Philippines and its impacts on the Filipino people, build a mass movement among Filipinos and allies against US militarism and military support for the Philippines, promote BAYAN USA's National Democratic Program as the alternative to US-backed war in the Philippines and Asia Pacific, build a broad anti-war movement against US militarism in the Asia Pacific and everywhere. And then use the campaign demands and de facto US basing and permanent troop presence in the Philippines, and all unequal military agreements between the US and the Philippines, and joint US-Philippine military war games and other war provocations, and US-backed counterinsurgencies in the Philippines, hold accountable the US military and US-funded Philippine military for violations against people's rights, especially in the countryside, and cut US security assistance to the Philippines. So please endorse, please donate, please hold your own film screenings of the documentary that we've made. And yeah, let's build this anti-imperialist movement together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nieves. Yeah, that was a really helpful presentation of the overall current context and conditions of the Philippines and the people's movement there. Really highlighting the growing resistance to US imperialism, militarization, and the ongoing collaboration between the corrupt bureaucrats in the Philippines and US imperialist interests. For our last set of speakers before we go to Q&A, I would like to welcome Bicho, the chairperson of JUPI USA, as well as Eric from JUPI, who's speaking to us, both of whom are speaking to us from Puerto Rico today, to kind of round out our discussion. Take it away, Bicho and Eric.
Hello, y'all. My name is Eric. This is my mate Picho. We represent JUPI, Juventud Unida Pro Independencia, or Youth United for Independence. We are a youth and student organization fighting for Puerto Rican independence with a socialist perspective. Nice to meet y'all. Here we have Picho, one of our leaders.
Can the slideshow please be presented? Thank you. You got it, Eric. Keep going.
This is a participation on the end of the militarization of Puerto Rico. Can you change the slideshow? I mean, next slide. Thank you. In Puerto Rico is a tropical I'm sorry, very nervous. Puerto Rico is a tropical paradise, an archipelago of 143 islands, including the inhabited main island, Vieques and Culebra. Founded in the 1500s by the Spanish Empire, it has been abused for its advantaged military position, fertile resources, and cheap and slave labor by first Spain and then the USA. Even though USA attempted to erase our language, our culture, our history, sterilize, conscript, cheat, and keep us in object poverty, our people and nation is still here, fighting. Outside, it may look like a democracy under the protection, quote unquote, of the United States, but we have no sovereignty in our own home. For even the present puppet regime were to do anything in favor of its people, the USA has the legal right and the might to force its will against us. Next slide. Here we have a map of the main island, Puerto Rico, on top. It's pretty big. On the bottom right corner, we have the two islands in Vieques, the one below, and Culebra, the one above. Vieques was once a military base. Half of the island was covered in that base. Next slide. Yes to Vieques, no to Navy. Vieques sí, Culebra no. Next slide.
I could take it from here, Eric. Thank you.
Got it.
So yeah, so like Eric was saying in the last slide, Vieques has been used as a military base for a very long time. So let me just tell you a little bit of that history. It's one of the main three islands of Puerto Rico, and it was invaded by the Navy in 1941, displacing thousands of Puerto Ricans into the neighboring islands and also into the diaspora. It was used, Vieques, as a practice site for toxic weapons, military training, and primarily for testing bombs, the same bombs that are used in Palestine. The presence of the Navy was pretty traumatic for Viequenses. It's common practice for the U.S. military to use physical and sexual violence to intimidate and oppress the people that they're occupying, and Vieques is no exception. There's stories of Viequense women saying that they needed to walk with their male family members to school or to the store just so that they can have like a buffer or something that could like hopefully stop any type of altercation from the Navy. Soldiers will also try to break into people's homes, terrorizing the community. And since the occupation, and especially in the 90s and the 2000s, Viequenses, Puerto Ricans, and allies fought with civil disobedience to kick out the Navy from Vieques. About 1,100 people were arrested during this period of resistance, but luckily in May 1st of 2003, the movement was successful and the Navy was ousted from Vieques. Afterward, the island received promises that there would be a cleanup of the contamination caused by the Navy, but they have yet to deliver. To this day, there are about 100,000 bombs that are still unexploded in Vieques. After the closure of the base in Vieques, there was a significant resurgence in employment opportunities in La Isla Nena, demonstrating that the military wasn't necessary to improve the economy of Vieques, which goes against this common narrative that in Puerto Rico, we need the military because they bring jobs. However, unfortunately, the legacy of militarism continues to this day in Vieques because there's currently now a lack of economic opportunities. So right after the Navy left, it was shown that jobs increased, but now because of the lack of investment in Vieques over time, it has decreased again. Vieques has the highest rate of cancer and asthma in Puerto Rico, and many Viequenses are forced to leave, opening up the island to be purchased by wealthy gentrifiers, gentries, accelerating the displacement. Next slides. Sorry, I forgot to tell you next slides while I was going. You can just go to like slide 6. Here's actually go back one slide. On the right, here's a diagram of how the Vieques population was distributed before the invasion of the Navy. And so you can see that it was very spread out across the island. When the Navy invaded, the population was thinned down to only occupy a quarter of the island. The rest of the island was uninhabitable because of all the bombing, but also was restricted until eventually Viequenses, as they protest and ousted the Navy, they pushed those limits a little bit. But mostly right now, the population in Vieques lives on the bottom right dotted area. I'm going to pass it to Eric on the next slide so we can talk about what's happening today in Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico, the anti-war movement has always been strong, from pacifist struggle in Vieques to the armed struggle of the Macheteros. Discordantly, as a slap to the face of all Puerto Ricans, the United States has reaffirmed Puerto Rico's colonial status by igniting military aggression against Venezuela and using our archipelago as a trampoline for the next war in the region. To do so, the U.S. has reactivated certain military bases and begun military practice. So far, we have seen nuclear attack submarines first spotted around August 8th. Amphibious vehicles, armored personnel carriers conducted military practices in Puerto Rico. On September 13, 2025, Trump sent in 10 F-35s along with 8 ships and 4,500 Marines to be used to intimidate and potentially attack Venezuela with the idea of forcing a regime change, supposedly over their ties to drug smuggling. The aggression started before this on September 3rd, with U.S. military forces murdering 11 boatmen who were returning to the coast of Venezuela, not only violating the sovereignty of the country, but using unproven connection to drug smuggling as a justification for war, by declaring them supposed cartels as terrorists. This extrajudicial killing was repeated on September 15th, killing an additional 10 men using unspecified weapons. Pentagon officials reported that most strikes were planned and would proceed without any approval from Congress. These are some of the pictures of the F-35 seen here. These are in the reopened base of Roosevelt Road. The senseless murder was followed by a deployment of Marines on September 5th in the southern coastal city of Arroyo, which is one in a series of operations that started August 31st. They did this even if the Puerto Rican Environmental Agency demarcated the beach as a protected nesting spot for sea turtles and other coastal species. This includes the deployment of hovercraft and live fire exercises, which serves to signal the local Puerto Ricans and the surrounding nations on the intentions of the U.S. in the region. The U.S. even increased the bounty they had on the Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, further exposing their hostilities and goals of regime change, even if the administration paints it as an anti-drug and anti-cartel operation. In Puerto Rico, there are 7 military bases, 4 of which have been closed. Due to remilitarization, one of the bases is said to be reopened. As you can see in this map, we have some of the bases here. And there's one on Aguadilla and the one on Roosevelt Road, which lies in the East Coast. Roosevelt Road, first surveyed in 1919 and used as a military outpost, it was deemed a critical post with a 100,000 feet air strip and deep water access, and a straight path to the Panama Canal. It was deemed too good to let go. Besides this point, the base was also used for training operations, a live fire training that poisoned the island of Vegas and caused harm, deaths, and sexual assaults around them. Thanks to the successful process for Puerto Ricans and the injustices done in Vegas, the base closed down in 2004. Yet the military never left. They simply decreased the most feasible operations in the archipelago. Since, as a colony, Puerto Rico has no legal way to say no to the deployment of foreign forces on their land and homes. This worsened with the arrival of the F-35s and the aggressive stance done by the present administration. The plane they're using, F-35s, are supersonic stealth fighters, armed to the teeth with technology to allow them to dominate the skies and strike at ground targets hundreds of miles away. With Venezuela being so close to Puerto Rico, it is obvious that the U.S. plans to use the archipelago to destabilize Venezuela, putting Puerto Rico in danger for retaliation.
Thanks, Eric. So I want to talk now about what does sorry, next slide as well. I want to talk about now like how Puerto Rico administration is participating in this current remilitarization. Jennifer Gonzalez, the current governor of Puerto Rico, has been an integral part of the advancement of the U.S. military in Puerto Rico. So during Jennifer's campaign for the governorship, she had made multiple promises to the Puerto Rican people that she would not allow Trump to intervene in Puerto Rico to accomplish his xenophobic agenda against migrant communities. She also promised that U.S. immigration policies would not affect Puerto Rico. In actuality, in February, ICE began raiding communities in Barrio Obrero and San Juan, where there is a majority Dominican population, without any notification to the local government. While Jennifer Gonzalez expressed contempt for these activities. She was also sure to collaborate with them, as in June, she granted the Department of Homeland Security the power to access license records from the Department of Transportation in order to make it easier for ICE to find the identity and addresses of undocumented people in Puerto Rico. So far in Puerto Rico, as a result of these raids, 500 people have been arrested and two have died under the hands of ICE. Next slide. Our governor, whom many argue won the election due to corruption, has also used public policy to advance the pro-military narrative and undermine the economic needs of the people. Under the supervision of the Fiscal Control Board, which is an unelected board, is appointed by the president who is on the board, and right now there's literally only 2 people on the board. What they did, they just so Jennifer Gonzalez, with the help of the board, invested $36 million to increase the police force in Puerto Rico. And also La Junta, the Fiscal Control Board, approved recently $735,000 to host a celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States in Puerto Rico. These are integral funds that can be used for so many more better things to solve all the problems in Puerto Rico, like infrastructure, the failing medical system, the failing education system, the failing electric grid system, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, is being siphoned into fascist demonstrations and aggression. Also, this can be used for workforce development. But instead of prioritizing jobs that can actually serve Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez's priority right now is creating 400 new textile manufacturing jobs so that Puerto Ricans can create uniforms for the US military. In July, Jennifer Gonzalez signed La Ley 69, which promotes the expansion of JROTC and ROTC programs in Puerto Rico by discouraging any disrespect or bullying of anybody who is interested in joining these programs. So signing this law, in our analysis, accomplishes 3 things. 1, it attacks the foundation of education because it promotes uncritical thought that is accompanied by joining the military, against free thinking, which is what universities are supposed to be promoting. 2, it criminalizes activism against militarism. And 3, it further creates Puerto Rican soldiers to die in US imperialist wars. Finally, as a most recent example of Jennifer Gonzalez's compliance in advancing militarism in the region, she recently hosted a press conference welcoming Peter Hegseth, the Secretary of the Department of War, stating, "We thank President Trump and his administration for recognizing the strategic importance of Puerto Rico to US national security and for their fight against drug cartels and the narco dictator Nicolas Maduro." Hegseth's visit was meant to clarify that the military activity in Puerto Rico is not simply a training and that it's, quote, a real world exercise on behalf of the vital national interests of the United States of America and ending the poisoning of the American people. You can go to the next slide. In all, Jennifer Gonzalez is yet another puppet leader in our world of the United States, whose purpose is to fulfill the desires of the United States. Her leadership demonstrates that not only is she wholeheartedly in support of the austerity inflicted on the Puerto Rican people, because of the United States, but that she also has no power to even stop it if she wanted to. As a colony of the United States, the Puerto Rican bureaucrats are powerless to challenge the US because it's the people who hold the true power. The true holders of power are the Puerto Rican people who continue to struggle against militarism today. I want to shout out Madres contra la Guerra. Maybe some of you might know them. They have been hosting actions almost every weekend since the militarization has started against the bases being reopened, and it's called like bringing together hundreds of Puerto Ricans who feel the same way. They also host a picket every Tuesday since the genocide in Palestine intensified on October 7th in 2023. So they do a lot of great work. We wholeheartedly support them. We also want to shout out the activations that we participated in this past week. September 23rd is a really important day in the Puerto Rican movement. It marks the anniversary of Grita de Lares, which is the first uprising against colonization from against the Spanish. It also marks the anniversary of the assassination of Filiberto Rios, who Eric mentioned earlier was the leader of the Macheteros, which was an armed group fighting for Puerto Rican independence. So these like anniversaries are really timely for this panel because they really represent how there's a continued surveillance in our movement. And even though there is still continued surveillance in our movement and we're still fighting militarization, the people are still doing their best to fight for sovereignty. And right now also supporting against the aggression in Venezuela. So yeah, that's what's happening in Puerto Rico right now. It's fucked up, but you know, we in solidarity with the Filipino movement, we in solidarity with the Korean movement. Power to the people. All of our countries deserve to have national liberation. Que viva Puerto Rico libre.
Thank you so much, Hoopy, and thank you to all of our speakers today so far for your wonderful presentations. So we are running a little lower on time, but we do still have time for Q&A, and if folks could stay on too, we'll have a few final words in the closeout. If you have questions still, please message them in the chat, and our chat moderator will pull them together. I think week of action for real. Nieves is on the go right now, but is still tuned in with us. If we could pin them as well. But I'll open up some of the initial questions that we've received so far. So the first one is open to all the speakers and especially those who were on the ground during the week of action. There was a question of were there any lessons from this week of action and the experience mobilizing during the UN General Assembly and the different activities that were hosted around it? Would any of our speakers want to take that one first? I know, especially Hoopy was mobilizing in Puerto Rico and BAYAN USA was on the ground. Go ahead, Vito.
I can start us off. Major lessons. I would say something that I've been reflecting on because on September 23rd, there were some big mobilizations happening, but also today I just came back from Vieques, and something that feels really unfortunate is that the people like really are agitated right now, and it feels unfortunate because like the intensification of militarism it causes this type of activation and like this radicalization, but I think it's also beautiful because it shows that our people really care about our country and want to see it free, um, and that also just seeing how in Puerto Rico, things have been getting stronger. A lesson that I'm finding is that um, we like are capable of fucking doing this shit. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when you're organizing, it feels like things aren't moving, and then things happen, and it's like, yo, like, nah, we could really do this. You know what I'm saying? And something else that I find to be an important lesson is that as colonized people, like displacement is like one of the number one things that we've had to deal with for over a century. And because of that, the diaspora of Puerto Ricans is so huge. It's double that of the population of Puerto Rico. And so something that I feel like is a lesson to take away is how important it is for the diaspora and the folks in your home country to really be united in fighting for sovereignty, because together things are so much stronger. And if we believe ourselves to be part of one nation, regardless of where we are, it's important to always be united in the way that we're fighting against the United States.
Thank you, Bicho. I see Eric. Did you want to add something to that?
Living here in the island, there's always been this calm but depressing tone. and that things are not gonna get better, that this is just the way things are. But during this last few months, hell, this week, just to say this week, the things I did, the people I seen and met, just fills me with hope. Like the path is long, it's arduous, but I know we can make it. I know we can help Puerto Rico. I know we can liberate Puerto Rico. I know we can do the same with with the Philippines, with South Korea, and everywhere. I see a light in the middle of the dark forest, and it's giving me a path to take and hope. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Eric. Nieves, Trejo, do you all have anything you wanted to add to this question?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's been so inspiring to see all the uprisings happening. I think specific to the week of action here in New York, around the United Nations, I think something I've just been thinking about is how important community integration is when an outreach, what especially when you're engaging these institutions that are so purposefully separated from the people. And you know, like the UN is in New York like all the time. So it's like this General Assembly happens here every year, you know, and like every year I've like really dreaded having to do anything around the UN because it's like feels so divorced from the everyday struggle of people here in the Northeast. Um, but I think what's been really like amazing is like really pushing the BAYAN organizations to like do our due diligence to make sure like our compatriots understand that they are an extension of the uprisings happening in the Philippines and that we should be, you know, out in the hundreds of thousands too, and making it clear to them what is going inside those walls of the UN and like what is the impacts of these abstract processes, these empty words that these head plunderers are spouting in there, and how it actually like relates to their lived reality. And you know, it's really hard. I do think there's still a lot to go, a long way to go for us overseas to really maximize this current moment in our history where, you know, there's so many people who are becoming conscious in the Philippines. But yeah, I think it's just about like being out there and really providing like all these unorganized people who are angry and outraged and really just like years and years of like built up rage, you know, give them an outlet. Like that's really our role. Yeah, and so I mean, I think that's just a general lesson beyond even this week of action. But yeah, like our enemies make their schemes and plots like super hard to understand. And so as organizers, we gotta make it simple and easy for people to know.
Thank you, Nieves. I'm gonna pass it to Cheho if you wanna respond to this question as well.
Yeah, I I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll try to keep it like I'll narrow it down. Um, I think one thing that came up for me with this question and hearing other people speak was finding points of unity among other movements, and also just even when you're not in an organizing space, talking to everyday people, your coworkers, just people on the street that you might have a conversation with, finding if the conversation goes toward politics or the economy or like what problems they're having at work or wherever, finding those points of unity among people. And even in terms of like national liberation movements, so many of our people have like a history of military repression from even just the US. And so like for example, Nodutdol members and we mobilized to BAYAN's martial law anniversary this past week, and like we have that shared history of martial law. Um, and so whenever there's like an opportunity with someone I meet out in public or who like mentions Marcos or something, maybe like a Filipino coworker or maybe like a Korean friend, or I just like find these ways to connect all of these things and like politicize it, because like even if this person is unorganized, like we are all organizers always. And so I feel like I'm always finding myself in this like position of politicizing a conversation and pushing it a little further. Because the people deserve that. Like they deserve to take their own history and their own like anger towards their conditions into their own hands. I kind of feel like that went all over the place, but points of unity, very important. Also just talking to people.
Thank you so much. And live on the ground, we have a snapshot of what some of the protests is looking like in New York right now. So thank
Yo,
you.
Nieves, you are gangster. Oh my God.
See, the people are in motion right now as we speak, organizing and fighting about all these issues that we're talking about today. This educational discussion is not separate from that, but it's to help us have a better common understanding and enrich the fight, right? And have clarity in what it looks like. So. We do have a couple more questions. There, before we might lose Nieves because they have to go to the action, we did have a particular question to Bayan. It was, how can we utilize the rising agitation of the masses regarding the ghost flood projects in the Philippines? If you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of already answered it a little bit in my previous like reflection. I think really just being out there and like giving people an outlet. If you build it, they will come. You know, that's the kind of vibe it is right now. And I think we really have to propagate and like spread our message and make sure people know that like the National Democratic Movement exists. There's a movement that's been fighting for our liberation for a long time. Like this uprising against corruption is not like out of nowhere or just happening this past month. So yeah, I think it's really the painstaking work that people have already been alluding to of like really like explaining to people simply and like concretely like what their stake is and like what they can do. Because like, there's a lot of energy right now. Yeah, and also being creative with the forms. I think there's a lot of especially Filipino migrant workers who are quite ready to like come out to the consulate and rah-rah with us like right now. But you know, like they would want to do something like in their church and have like a discussion and like um this past week like some of the youth in Bayan like went to um Elmhurst and like set up water balloons where people could like throw water balloons at the faces of the politicians in the Philippines, representing like the flood corruption and like making them feel like our pain of like, you know, the constant floods in our country. And yeah, it was like a really visceral like experience for some of the community members who came through. And yeah, just being creative with the forums and giving people an outlet. Yeah, but then providing the education to so that it doesn't just stay at like surface level agitation, but like a larger systemic analysis of what's going on, and then make sure they join your organization.
Thank you so much. So the simple and answer is the hard work of being side by side with the people when they're agitated and giving life to their participation and showing what the solution can look like too. Okay, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. But of course, you all know who these organizations are, so feel free to keep reaching out and talking to us. But one of the next questions, which is for everyone, is a question about the look into the future. It says, what is next for the anti-imperialist movement in 2026? Would anyone like to tackle this one first? Yeah, big question. Everyone's got their thinking faces on. We'll give it a second.
I could
Go
take
ahead,
this
Sam.
one, at least from our perspective as Nodutdol, like can't speak for everyone. Um, but I think it's gonna be things are a little unclear right now as to like what the next phase of our struggle and the next phase of this campaign will be because of this new presidency. Um, I think given the volatility of President Trump and also the uncertainty with President Lee Jae-myung's desires and what he's actually going to follow through on, I think it's safe to say he will go further if we push him to go further. And so I think, again, at least for us, taking the momentum from this campaign that we waged a year ago, continuing that, but also taking the momentum from the People Summit for Korea, and bringing that everywhere we can. I think it's already having a major impact on people's opinions on Korea, and anti-US sentiment is like clearly growing in the ROK, which is really exciting, and it brings me a lot of hope. So I think we're kind of playing it by ear right now as to like what the next phase of struggle will be, but it's also clear that even without something like US out of Korea Part 2 that we can like give to people concretely, to just continue struggling, doing education, being out in the streets with other organizations, and extending solidarity to other struggles as much as we can, and just building the movement more generally.
Thank you so much. Bicho, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about like strengthening and like pointing our campaign work more clearly. I think I also wanna, I don't know, I feel like I said in the chat, like unity is a big theme these days, you know? Like it's getting so much stronger. And I think stuff like this is also really good. But I think something that's next for the anti-imperialist movement is to like continue to do our best to meet people where they're at, like Nina was saying, and like find what are like the minimum and maximum things that people are willing to do, and find a way to do them in a way that still keeps people safe to the best of our ability, while also keeping in mind like the need to foster the unity so that it can be in a place that we can do things that are more like militant and like um like hurting these people's pockets, you know. I know like something that Hoopy is really trying to focus on is building our mass movement of Puerto Rican youth and students. Um, so I think just supporting each other and like the building of each other's mass movement is something that's really important. So like if you or like your members know anybody who's like not organized, that's like Korean or Filipino or Puerto Rican, like finding ways to plug each other into each other's movements, I think is something really important for 2026. So that way we can like really grow exponentially.
Thank you so much, Bicho. Nieves, did you have any comment on this question? Oh, not sure if you're still able to unmute.
I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to hear. Can you
It's all
say it
good.
again?
It was a question about what's next for the anti-imperialist movement in 2026. What does that look like moving forward, and for our respective movements too?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted to bring up about this question is it is the 250th anniversary of the United States next year. And really the US is our common enemy as the #1 imperialist in the world right now. So I think we should really do something about that, especially here in the Northeast. Like, I mean, I'm based in Philly, so it's like they're already getting ready. Like because I was like the first capital of this genocidal settler colony, and they're already putting in a lot of money. And Philly is like one of the poorest cities in the country, and so I think that would be a important convergence point for our movements. I think more broadly than that, I don't have a great answer. I mean, essentially the crisis is just going to deepen, and so we have to unite the anti-imperialist forces to work together and strengthen our respective movements.
Thank you so much. I think we're just about hitting time, but I think that's a good way to round out the discussion today. And we can close out here. I just again want to reiterate appreciation for all of the presentations. If we could present the next slide. But this is just a snapshot, right? These are just a glimpse into different aspects of the anti-imperialist movement, of the different national liberation movements. All around the world, and how they're also playing out in this country as well. But I think I saw in the chat, Bicho said, we're so much bigger than our enemy, right? And so the task at hand is how do we unite the broadest range of the masses together to see who their enemy really is, but to also see what the solution is, and to see that they are the ones who can make change and that they have a role in this fight. We heard a lot of really good discussion points, and some of the through lines that folks are sharing about is that the US is really continuing to expose itself for the real role that it has as the #1 enemy of the people, but also that the people are more conscious than ever of the need to oppose US imperialism and to oppose US imperialist maneuvers against the people. We're also seeing that the masses are more and more decisive and militant in their organizing efforts with these rising mass mobilizations in our homelands and in the diaspora, expanding the reach and bringing together various sectors and political forces and increased organized strength, which is really inspiring, and only needs to grow and continue, Um, uh, I think, some of the calls we heard being raised up are really around the need to end the ongoing and growing US militarism and war efforts, whether the war games or the bombings or these unequal military agreements, which treat our homelands and as overseas bases of the US and treat the people like collateral. We're also seeing raising up the calls to really address the economic hardship that the people are facing, which result from the ongoing collaboration between the local ruling class and the US imperialists. And really, we're seeing how the people are really unwilling to tolerate the continued collaboration that we see between our home governments and the US imperialists, and which continue to subserviate the interests of the people to continued foreign dominance by the US ruling class. And I appreciate the reflections toward the end as well, specifically of the role of those overseas in the diaspora who have been actively organizing both to oppose the rising fascism here in the US, but also importantly, linking up with the growing mass movement in their homelands in the fight against imperialism, against US-led war, and against US-backed fascism. And ultimately underpinning this crisis that we're seeing and the hardship faced by the people of the world, the continued displacement from our homelands, is really a result of this imperialist system, which is causing the crisis in the first place. Despite their lies that it's the people, that it's the migrants causing it, we know who's really responsible, and we intend to hold them to account for it. And so with that, genuine liberation is not going to be granted by external forces. It's actually the people themselves who are ultimately the decisive factor in the genuine liberation of our homelands. So in order to achieve a genuine solution to this crisis, we all have the task that all of our speakers were putting on the table. We have the task to organize, right? We have the task to really advance our respective struggles, and we have the task to link together our respective movements in solidarity and in joint political struggle alongside each other against our common enemy of US imperialism. So I hope folks take those lessons. As we always say, these types of educational discussions are not to remain in this forum, but they're supposed to be applied in the practical action that we do in the day-to-day. I see Nieves has one more point. Do you want to hop in before we wrap up with the calls to action again? Oh, I read the chat. Okay. In the chat, let's see. Nieves says, we are about to do an anti-corruption chant and choreography. A lesson for the anti-imperialist movement is to have fun and joy with your comrades and the masses, even in the midst of crisis. So let's hear this. Wow. Find joy in the struggle, everyone. Thank you so much, Nieves. It's a good reminder. Okay. Let's show the last. Please send the videos too. I see the documentation crew hard at work. Folks, keep an eye on the social media as well. Spread this widely. We can't hear it, but we can see it. Uh, I think the audio is a little jumpy, but if folks haven't learned, we can maybe you can send the chant in the chat and folks can watch the videos to learn them. But Tech, can we present the last slide just to round out the calls to action? Okay, so campaigns, mobilizing the people and organizing, that's the solution. We heard a lot from our speakers about ways to participate. On the side of ILPS, one of our major national campaigns has been the Defend People's Struggle campaign, where we have been working with our members and as an alliance as a whole to organize in various forms, from struggles on the ground to coordinated actions across the country in fighting the rising fascism here in the US. With the open attacks on migrants, the repression of workers, attacks on youth, so on and so forth. We've really been taking on the fight against fascism here, but also how the US is promoting fascism and increased militarism all around the world. And so we've been taking on this campaign as our contribution to the anti-imperialist struggle and working with many of the organizations here as well. So if you all are interested in learning about this campaign or getting involved, please go to our website, ILPS-US, ILPS.US. And if you go to the tab on Defend People's Struggle, you can see how to get involved as an individual or as an organization. We also have educational resources there. And similarly, we invite all of you to sign on and endorse the Defend People's Struggle campaign, which will send the link in the chat so that we can continue working together and coordinating across our movements. Additionally, there's the campaigns of the different speakers and organizations. So Puerto Rico with Puerto Ricans. So you can check that out on the JUPI website. There will be more updates to come. There's the call to endorse and join the US Out of Korea campaign led by Nodutdol. And to keep an eye out for the upcoming events around the Nodutdol APEC campaign and around the report back from the People's Summit for Korea. And of course, last but not least, we invite you all to join the US Out of the Philippines campaign, which you can check out on BAYAN USA's website. And we know that there's also organizations here today. And so we want to work with you on the campaigns that you're taking on as well and bring more people into the fold of the anti-imperialist struggle. So thank you all so much. Continue to be with your communities and remember that that not only can things change, but things will change if we are decisive to win. So go out and organize and draw in your whole communities into this fight together. Thank you all so much, and long live international solidarity. US out of our homelands. Thank you all.
Yeah.